You are a writer, and right now you are working on a book.
The book is finished and it comes out in March. So that's very, very exciting. It's been a long time in the works. I think technically it's been in the works for over 20 years because it's a memoir and a lot of it is pulled from my diaries. I've kept a diary my whole life. So um, that's what's going on there.
The title of the book is Philosophy.
Yes.
And when people will see this title, they will probably think, oh my God, so this illness is all about falling.
It's a play on words, of course. It's not spelled philosophy, it's spelled Fallosophy, like Fall, as you mentioned. My blog is called Tripping on Air, which is, I guess, what I've been known for to this point. So, Tripping on Air, I think it means, for me, it means a number of things. I like to travel, there's trips that way. But yes, MS does affect my balance and my mobility. And so I am prone to tripping and falling. And sometimes, on air over nothing, so to speak. So I felt that the memoir, entitling it Philosophy, was a nod to that element of MS, but also the lessons that I've learned and the knowledge that I've gained over the years that have sort of helped me cultivate a type of way of life and life skills and a philosophy, if you will.
From the chapters you sent me, a few things became, and I think we need to emphasize. One of them was when you felt that coming out with MS was similar to the LGBT community who are coming out. And that you also mentioned that a lot of the people with MS, especially at the very beginning, they are not disclosing their condition simply because they don't want to lose their jobs, to not lose their partner, and nobody wants to get hurt. And they are hoping they could mask the symptoms for as long as possible. How was it for you?
It was difficult. When I was first diagnosed, I was very open about my MS diagnosis because I was really naive. And I didn't actually expect that I would be treated differently because I had a chronic illness. I was very much taken by surprise when I did find that it was impacting certain elements of my life, professionally and socially, missed opportunities. And so when I learned those lessons, I started keeping my MS diagnosis to myself and I became much more closeted about it. It wasn't until my so-called invisible, non-apparent symptoms started to become more obvious that I started realizing I had to be public about it. And that kind of coincides with when I started writing my blog in 2015 because people were asking questions and drawing incorrect conclusions. And I felt like I needed to set the record straight. But in a lot of ways, it was about not having as much of a choice or the kind of privilege to keep that information to myself anymore. It's a really difficult line to walk because we can't get rid of stigma and barriers and ableism, basically, if we are not willing to raise our hands and say, this is chronic illness, this is disability, this is MS, this is what this looks like. But it's still a reality that we sometimes still will face consequences to that information. It's really, I think, something that individuals, a decision that you have to make on a case by case basis and to decide what's right for you and who gets to know that information. I have a very public, openly MS presence. If you Google me, you're going to find out that I have MS, but I still feel like, if a stranger I encounter at the drugstore or in a taxi asks, what's wrong or what happened to you, I don't owe that person an explanation and I don't volunteer. I still feel like even though I'm very public and open about my MS, I still set my own boundaries that are right for me.
In some of your chapters, you disclose that you would rather be considered pregnant because you were sleeping a lot. And once you fell on a drum kit, and you would rather think that you were drunk than actually say that you had MS. Were you that inhibited because of that diagnosis?
So, yes, I was at that point in my life with MS. I had the family of my boyfriend at the time had tried to stop him from dating me because of my MS. He was worried. His parents, his father in particular, was worried that I was going to ruin his life. I had been passed over for employment opportunities. So, um, yeah, the stakes were really real. And so it was easier for me. I felt there was, I mean, I'm joking a little bit in the chapter. I'm trying to tell the story in a lighthearted way. You know, I was on a choir tour and I was sitting at the front of the bus. I wasn't staying up late. I was going to bed early. And there were rumors swirling around that it was because I was pregnant. And of course, it was because I have MS or I had MS and I was having to keep up and I had a lot of fatigue. And yeah, I let those rumors fly because it was nobody's business. And I didn't want to tell, you know, 50 of these choristers that it was none of their business what was really going on. I mean, it wasn't really their business either to think that I was pregnant, but if that was the rumor they wanted to spread, then that was easier for me to handle um, than sharing that medical history that they were not entitled to in the first place. And in the other example where I lost my balance at a rehearsal for a concert that I was performing in and I fell on the drum kit. And I don't know. I'm sure maybe they just thought I was clumsy. Didn't smell like alcohol or anything like that, but I joke that I was more willing to let them think that I was drunk at 11 in the morning and that's why I fell down than explain myself. That was a professional opportunity and I thought I'm not going to get hired again if they know that I have MS. Things have changed since then, of course, but that's I guess some insight into what goes through our minds.
You are also talking about how you learned to self-categorize and the challenges you've had until you've learned how to do that.
Yeah.
First, how hard it was to get into a bathroom in a Tim Hortons.
Yeah. You know, we in Canada, we are a wealthy nation. We don't prioritize accessibility as much as we should, and bathroom access is not universal. I live in Toronto, where the majority of restaurants are not accessible. Many have bathrooms in the basement down a flight of stairs. There was a situation where I wasn't allowed to use the bathroom um, at a Tim Hortons. It's part of the story of learning to self-catheterize, which when you have MS, you can have a lot of difficulty with bladder function, which I have had. And there was a lot of stigma around that also, but it turned out to be a very successful tool for me to learn to adapt to my disease that wasn't as scary as, it sounds.
I'm sure a lot of your readers will probably think how you managed to juggle this condition and a marriage plus other responsibilities. How do you do that?
I mean, sometimes successfully and sometimes not. I think that's true for everyone. We are all juggling families and social lives and careers and all these different responsibilities. And I think sometimes you can be excelling in one area and you drop the ball in other areas. I don't think that I'm unique to that, like modern day problem of of life. I don't have children, and that is a major, you know, that's a lot of work for a lot of people, MS or otherwise. So, yeah, I think we're all just kind of putting in what we can every day. And, sometimes we're awesome and sometimes we're not.
You also disclosed that you are legally blind. I'm
Yes.
wondering if this condition is permanent or can you regain some of your original sight?
So many people with MS can have a symptom called optic neuritis, which impacts the optic nerve. It can happen in one or both eyes. In my case, it was my presenting symptom, and I lost vision to varying degrees in both eyes. So I'm not legally allowed to drive a car. And I have kind of a wonky color vision, but I'm not as blind as I was when I first had this symptom. And that's true of many MS symptoms where you have kind of an attack and then you have a degree of recovery. You may not recover 100%. But I did have some recovery, not enough to drive a car, but um, I I function, and it's easier now than it used to be because there are so many adaptive technologies on computers and phones, and you get used to it. You figure out a way.
You've been traveling a lot. You've been
Yes.
a singer. Are you still doing that?
I don't sing anymore, but I travel recreationally as much as possible. The pandemic made my husband and I, take a big break from that, but travel has always been something that's been really important to us. So, yes, I was in New York in September. I was in Paris in October. Really, really enjoy traveling. It's one of my favorite things.
What I noticed in the style of your writing the book, it's very open and sometimes you're very blunt in your feelings. So you really want people to know that you felt very frustrated that you were not allowed in that bathroom. You're not shy of using the F word in the book. So your style is very straightforward.
Yeah, I think there are other books out there written about chronic illness and MS in particular. For me, when I was first diagnosed, I didn't find the kinds of books that I was looking for that spoke to me in my language. I think there is a there's a compulsion to sugarcoat stories of disability for us to kind of to project an image of, a palatable patient. And I don't do that really. Like, I felt like if I was going to start my blog even, and then also in writing this book, if I was going to tell the story, then I wanted to offer the kind of information that I needed, but wasn't finding to kind of write the book that I needed, and to really like tell it like it is. So yeah, there's some colorful language, because if you can't swear about MS, then, what do we even have swear words for?
You are the daughter of a registered nurse. Your mother was a registered nurse.
She was, yeah.
Did it help? Does it help?
It's funny, when I was first diagnosed, I needed to give myself injections. I was really young, 23, it was scary. I didn't want to give myself these big needles. My mom had been a nurse. She seemed like the natural fit to help me through that. And she did help me, but I think it's different when it's your own kid. I think she had some anxiety about all of it also, but she has been a sounding board for me, and especially in those early years, helped me make medical decisions and process the information for sure.
right now you finished the book and it's now in on the editor's desk.
Yes, it's with the designers. So they're choosing fonts and layouts and all these things that I'm not sure of the process, but I'm learning a lot.
And how can people order it?
You can go to my website, which is trippingonair.com, and there's pre-order information there. So it's in Canada, it's available at Indigo, it's available at independent bookstores, it's available on Amazon. There's a link on my website that will show you where you can find it, where you can order it from the bookstore that's closest to you. It's always great if you can support your local independent bookshop, but you can also get it at the usual mass retailers as well.
You've been living with MS for 15 years or more.
No, more than 20 years now.
Have you seen changes in the way MS is being perceived?
I've seen changes, so many changes. When I was first diagnosed, there were only 4 medications that were not super effective to treat MS. Now there are over 20 and they are much more effective. There's still no cure, but we are getting close to figuring out what causes MS, and that will lead to better therapies for sure. I feel like conversations between doctors and patients have changed. There's more of a culture of empowering patients to advocate for their own care, which is, it's practical for everyone. It's empowering for patients, but we are also under-resourced for healthcare. And so the more involved you can be in your own care, MS is a lifelong condition. It's patients are now, when I was first diagnosed, it was like, don't Google your symptoms. Whereas now we're being encouraged to learn as much as possible and to stay up on advances in medicine. The patient relationship with pharmaceuticals has changed a lot as well, where pharmaceuticals are now really valuing patient experience. I've been on some advisory boards. It's really exciting to have a voice in that space. And I think, the perception is starting to change. I think there is a lot of stigma, but I hope that things are starting to change in general. In Canada, we have the highest incidence per capita of MS in the world. So I feel like if you don't know someone with MS already, you will. It's very common. So it's kind of something that impacts all of us, whether it's you or somebody that you care about.
Is there something that you wish had known at the very beginning and it would have made a difference?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and I think it's so hard to deal in hypotheticals because I think I was always kind of a know-it-all kind of kid. I don't think anyone could have told me well, maybe that's not true. Maybe if I had seen examples of people living well with MS in media, if the narrative around mobility aids and disability was different, I think that would have helped. Um, I very much believed that all of my best days were behind me at 23, which is a tragic thought. And it's hard to move forward from that. And I learned that that's absolutely not true. And so, but I do think that some of these lessons have to be learned in real time.
You also mentioned that a lot, a, a big number of people with disability, they are spread all over the world. Somehow there is no strength in number.
Yeah, I think that I hope that that's starting to change, but disability is, of course, the largest marginalized group of people worldwide, but we don't have the kind of strength of advocacy and community that we see some other communities really benefit from. And a lot of that comes from the stigma around disability that compels us to hide our disabilities, to feel internalized ableism, to feel a sense of shame about our bodies and what they're capable of. And it's really hard to advocate for equal treatment and accessibility when we're popularizing euphemisms like differently abled, you know? If we say differently abled or even special needs, we're denying that there's a problem and that there's anything that needs fixing. You know, don't worry about it. I got this. I'm not disabled. I'm differently abled. And so um, these are things. Language is important. It's starting to change, but this concept of disability pride, which I write about in my book, was something that I was initially resistant to because of internalized ableism. I was like, who wants to be proud of being like, nobody wants to be disabled, but um you know, feeling pride doesn't mean I love my MS. It means that I feel I have a right to take up space and be here um and have the same opportunities that non-disabled people have.
I find that communication is a big issue. A lot of the people don't really know how to ask their questions, and they sometimes, in trying not to offend, they are actually asking questions that do offend.
Yeah, I, yeah, of course. And that can be a frustration for people with all kinds of different marginalized identities. I think it's important to be curious and to ask questions and, you know, sort of make that decision of what you think is appropriate. Maybe do your own research if you are that curious. Ask yourself why you want to know something before you ask a stranger something about their body. um yeah, and I think it can be taxing for people with disabilities to feel like they always have to be educating or always have to be fundraising or always have to be answering questions about their bodies. For some people really do enjoy sharing this kind of information. And that's something you have to decide on your own, but nobody should feel compelled.
What are you working on right now? Do you have another project? This is finished, the book.
The book, yeah. Well, promoting it for sure is some work. I'm currently working on a podcast and a blog post with a annual holiday gift guide for people with chronic illness and MS. It's always a really fun part of the year. I am, you know, pitching other television projects and just it's like different hands in different things all the time. So it will be, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, but focusing really on promoting the book in the medium term and hopefully getting to do some readings and meeting readers. I'm really excited about that.
Someone who would be diagnosed, right now, what would you recommend? Books or anything?
I think it's really important to find someone that you can connect with who is at a similar age and similar life stage as you are. That was really helpful for me. Just know that you're not alone, have somebody to talk to who really gets it. We also know that it is incredibly important to start treatment early and to get on a highly effective therapy. So some patients really struggle with denial and the stress of decision making of starting a therapy. These feel like massive decisions, and they are. But it's really, really important. We are learning all the time that, you know, when damage happens from MS, it's very difficult to undo it. Well, we can't undo it. You just sort of, it's almost the luck of the draw, how much recovery you're going to have. There's no guarantee that you're going to go back to your baseline. We know that MS now is progressive from the start. So, yeah, find an MS friend and get on an effective therapy. Find a doctor that has the same treatment philosophy as you, because it is going to be a long-term relationship.
I was wondering, Ardra, is there something that you would like to cover? Because I don't know everything you do. Is there anything that you would like to, a topic that you would like to touch?
I don't think so. I mean, the book is the biggest thing for me right now to promote. So, um, yeah, I don't, I don't think so. Are you worried this is going to be too short of an episode?
No, it's just that I wanted to move to another question. If there's, if there's something, what is it that you miss from the life before MS?
For a long time, I identified as a singer, even when I was just singing on an amateur level. When I was young, I wanted to be a professional opera singer. That never materialized the way that I wanted to, but I did enjoy a semi-professional life as a singer for a long time. And it was such a part of my identity that I didn't think, I didn't know who I could possibly be without that in my life. For a long time, I felt like singing was saving my life. I loved it so much. And then as I started to become more disabled, my ability to sing stopped. It just, it's very physical singing, and I wasn't strong enough. I didn't have the same kind of breath control. And then in 2020, I actually had a relapse that affected my speech and swallowing. So most people might not notice it, but this fry that you can hear in my voice is part of that damage. For me, I was really intentional. I tried to be really intentional about my reinvention, like knowing that I was losing singing. I thought, what am I going to do next that's going to fill me up in the same way? It felt impossible. I didn't think that I could find anything that would give me the same kind of joy that singing did, but I tried. I made lists of everything that I thought I was good at, every skill that I thought I had, everything that I liked. And then I made a list of all the things, all the reasons why I thought singing was meaningful to me. Like what was it that I liked about singing? I liked language. I liked communicating with an audience. I liked creative expression. I liked learning new things. I liked being on stage. And so it's kind of how I came to the conclusion that I should start a blog. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen, but I realized that writing could meet a lot of the same needs for me that singing did. So it was something that was creative. It was something that allowed me to use my voice. It was something that connected me with an audience, all these things. And so, and it took off more than I ever thought that it could. And it has been so rewarding. In fact, in a lot of ways, even more rewarding than singing. And I mean, somebody sent me a message the other day saying, that they had learned so much from me. And the most important thing was to have courage. And I felt that's so important and humbling and meaningful. And I'm so proud of that. I'm so grateful for the time that I had in my life to sing. And I do miss it, but I don't miss it in a painful, grieving kind of way. I kind of recognize it now as a time and a place. And now I'm in a different chapter and I get to do something different. And if something should happen someday that means I can no longer write or communicate in the way that I am now, I will hopefully draw on this experience and try to figure out something else.
You are working on a podcast with your husband, Alex Hadari.
No, so he's not my husband.
Oh,
Um, his wife. So Alex Hajar has a
oh, I'm
wife
sorry.
named Nicole. It's okay. No, you know what? I totally understand the confusion. So Alex is actually very similar in personality to me. And his wife has MS, and her personality is more similar to my husband. So Alex and I are both extroverts. Our partners are both introverts. So I sort of feel like on the show, which is also called Tripping on Air, you can find it on YouTube wherever you get podcasts. He almost feels like the voice of my husband. He articulates the partner perspective really beautifully. So it's a very good it's a good match, but not a romantic one. And you're not the first person to assume that he is my partner or husband, but he is he is able to articulate the partner experience better actually than my husband does because he's not kind of an extrovert that way. So,
I don't want people to have this perception that, oh my God, it's the end of the world and poor woman. What I liked about your perspective, I read an article on legal blindness, and you were talking about the perks of being legally blind, and one being that you can drink because you don't have to drive anyway.
that's right.
So I was wondering if you have an anecdote for us.
Well, I have many examples of the best perk of MS for sure is not having to wait in line at the airport. We just flew back from Paris and the wait at Pearson, we saved hours, I'm sure, by having wheelchair assistance. The unfortunate side of that is that this is irritating to some non-disabled people. They think it's special treatment. And that's a whole nother story. But I can think of lots of travel perks that MS has allowed us. I got to get up close to see the Mona Lisa at the Louvre when there was throngs of people behind the velvet rope, and I got to wheel right up close. Um, when we were at Holyrood Palace in Scotland, um, we were doing a tour, and there was a big flight of stairs that was too much for me to handle, and so I got to ride in the Queen's private elevator, which felt pretty fancy. They're pretty good at concessions in Europe. But I think this is maybe one of the misconceptions that people have about anyone with a chronic illness or a disability is that life is sad and tragic. And of course, people with disabilities have been kind of pimped out for decades in um, fundraising campaigns, to solicit funds through pity and these tragic narratives. And it's not the whole story. MS is hard, but I have learned that a difficult life doesn't have to be a joyless life. And that's been a massive lesson for me. MS is really hard, and I complain about it all the time. But I have a really great life, and I feel really blessed and really fortunate.
You did some modeling a while ago.
No, I didn't do any modeling, but I created and hosted a television show called Fashion Dis, which is a lifestyle series on AMI TV. It's a makeover show that centers people with disabilities, gives them a platform. I was frustrated that people with disabilities have been left out of fashion and beauty, and I wanted to create that space for others. And at the same time, we focus on adaptive and inclusive fashion and beauty brands, which is a really exciting emerging field in the industry. I used to put Rollator supermodel in my social media bio as a joke. Um, I thought it was funny, but then people thought I actually was a model.
I
And
did.
That
I
was like
was
super
convinced.
embarrassing for me because I'm not a model. I've never modeled professionally. But I am very prolific at posting photos of myself using mobility aids because when I first needed a mobility aid, I couldn't find images of people that looked cool and that were using mobility aids. And I feel like it's so important for us to see those images of people traveling and living their lives and experiencing things. And it just helps so much to make that adjustment to what can be a major life change and a grief, a loss of mobility, to reframe mobility aids as tools that will help you live. It's really important to me to help other people feel like they can rock a mobility aid. It's yeah, it sounds like frivolous, but that's why I do it.
I've seen photos of you where you actually look very glamorous.
Well, I think this is maybe an important contradiction, or maybe it seems like a contradiction, right? That you can have this exciting so-called glamorous life, but that's also why I feel like it's so important to tell the whole story and to not sugarcoat the reality of MS. You can say like it's this and it's also this. It's hard, and here I am in Paris eating a croissant and looking at the Eiffel Tower, you know?
From the opera singers, who do you like?
Oh, wow. Well, I was always a big fan of Maria Callas. I just got to see Susan Graham for the third time when we were in Paris. Renee Fleming, of course. John Fanning's a Canadian baritone who was my teacher for a time, and he's just a gem of a human.
Any chances you will be in Newfoundland?
Gosh, I don't know. We'll see. I did the opera program in Newfoundland uh, a few times, actually. I feel like 2013, 2012, around then. I spent a good amount of time in St. John's. And also, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Opera Nuova, but that's a program that I was involved with for 2 or 3 years back in the day. I loved Newfoundland. I had a really great time there. It was a little unnerving how many seasons you could have in the month of June and May. Um, but yeah, I had a really great time with Opera Nuova. I think that program maybe still exists, and I would encourage anyone to check out their productions when they happen. I think usually in June every year. If there's an invitation to speak there, the MS Society or whatever, for a fundraiser, I would love to come and talk about the book. Thank you so much for wanting to interview me. It's been a real pleasure.